Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for No Pride in Prison, the criminalization of LGBT people. It's an honor to gather here today in the virtual State House setting. And so excited to be joined today by Senator Julian and Representative Jack Patrick Lewis, who'll be providing opening remarks. Senator Sear, the floor is yours.
It's good to be with you and Black and Pink and my good friend Jack Patrick Lewis and a whole slew of other folks for this briefing. Today is the last day of Pride Month, and you know, if we've been sort of hearing you know, a lot of kind of conversations in the LGBTQ community, and I am one of two openly LGBTQ members of the Senate, and you'll hear from Jack, who's one of now six openly LGBTQ members in the House. Yeah, we added an extra one this year. You know, but as we're sort of concluding Pride Month, and you know, look, we've got a lot to celebrate, and I hope, you know, in part because of the remarkable progress that's been made on vaccination coming out of this pandemic, folks were actually able to have some fun. You know, but we really need to remember that we've got a lot of work left to do. Transgender people have an average life expectancy of 30 to 35, which is lower if you're a transgender person of color. LGBTQ members of our community are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide before the age of 25. You know, around the world, right, globally, there's only 29 countries who recognize equal marriage. 69 countries still have laws in the books that criminalize homosexuality. And closer to home, you know, Massachusetts, we certainly have a lot to be proud about historically in our support for LGBTQ folks. But really, we've sort of been resting on our laurels in recent years. And that's particularly been the case of criminal justice. And I've been really proud to have teamed up with Black and Pink and other stakeholders in really trying to push the Commonwealth and particularly the Department of Corrections just to get this right, to make sure that people who are incarcerated are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identity. And unfortunately, we know that that is not happening. So several years ago, we actually worked to get, first starting with data, trying to actually figure out what is actually going on among individuals who are in prison. What does that look like from an LGBTQ community perspective? And now we've been working on another series of bills. The Rights Act, which is the rehabilitation, including guaranteed health, treatment, and safety bill, would address serious concerns for LGBTQI plus incarcerated people. That is legislation we're working on. We're also working on several other bills that we're working on with Michael and Black and Pink. So this is just really important stuff. And I think, you know, as we're sort of concluding Pride Month, it's hot. You know, if you're like me, maybe you have a bit of a sore throat because you've been screaming too much at tea dance. But, you know, we've got important work to do here, right? And I think we need to take the, you know, the revelry and the celebration and really recommit and reaffirm that all LGBTQ people, you know, from all walks of life, including those who are dignity and treated with respect. And it really bothers me that here in Massachusetts, that's not happening, and that's not right. And I'm proud to be working to change that. With my friend Jack Patrick Lewis, who is the fiercest of legislators and allies and advocates on this issue. So I think I'm going to kick it over to Jack. Thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to the rest of the programming and have a
Thank you so much, Julian, for that introduction, and I'll keep waiting for my invitation to come visit you in P-Town, maybe next year.
Standing invitation. She's just got to hop on that ferry.
We'll take this offline, but really, it's so great to be with everyone. Michael, thank you for all that you do, pulling this conversation together, Black and Pink, but also just want to thank our colleagues. Julian mentioned the growing membership of our LGBTQ plus Legislative Caucus here in Massachusetts. We're becoming larger and more diverse with every passing year. And while each of us try to use our offices as a conduit for our larger LGBTQ plus community, I think the more of us we have, the more diverse voices we have around the tables of power where decisions are being made, I think the more our community is taken care of. So I appreciate all of my colleagues. And then also just want to make sure I also thank the folks in the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus, the important work they've done in criminal justice reform. But as Senator Julian just said, this work is never over, and we need to keep at it. And really appreciative of the leaders of the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus for making sure that none of us, none of our colleagues, none of our legislative bodies rest on our laurels, that if we celebrate, it's a celebration only to bridge us to the next effort. A couple things just want to add. Julian reflected a little bit about legislative solutions. Very happy to be working with Senator Sear in Black and Pink, and a growing number. I would start listing all of the endorsing organizations, but there are so many that I know I would leave probably half a dozen off. But an act to promote rehabilitation, including guaranteed health, treatment, and safety for incarcerated LGBTQI plus people. To any of our colleagues in this conversation or staffers, there's still time to co-sponsor these bills. And so the Senator and I would love your support. And as the bill moves through the legislative process, we'll definitely be looking to you to support us in this effort. But again, as the Senator said, this is one piece of what needs to be a comprehensive and robust effort to make sure that the criminalization of our bodies, of our community, can't stand, here in the Commonwealth, and that when there are legislative solutions, we need to take them, we need to eliminate them, we need to replace them, but we also need to make sure that we take care of one another as a larger LGBTQ plus community, and of course that includes people who are currently incarcerated. And so very grateful again to be working with Senator Sear in Black and Pink to make sure that those people who are under our care as a Commonwealth, that as a Commonwealth we have forced under our care, for lack of a better way of putting it, that we have an obligation to make sure that they have the support and safety that they deserve while incarcerated, but more than that, that the laws and the situations that led up to their incarceration, and that the reality of post-incarceration, that we are all supported in a way so that folks can go back to being a contributing member of society in a very positive way. But with our current laws on the books, with the current state, as we're going to hear shortly, of reality for queer folks incarcerated, we do more than a disservice for them. We harm them, and then we make it that much more difficult to contribute in a healthy way post incarceration. So again, really want to thank everyone involved. Want to continue to ask that you challenge us as legislators to do more and to do better, and look forward to continuing to partner in this and many other efforts. Thank you.
No, thank you both for those beautiful opening remarks for today's briefing. And thank you to the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus, co-led by Senator Jamie Eldridge and Representative Mary Keefe, who have been stalwart warriors in the fight for criminal justice matters. These are people who show up at prisons. They show up when it's time for rallies. They show up when it's time to draft legislation. And they show up at every stage in the process, much like Representative Lewis and Senator Sear. So it's really a pleasure to work with all of you again and again over the years. And this year for Black and Pink has been nothing less than monumental. We survived a pandemic in community with all of you, and we helped all of our inside members also survive a pandemic. We fought for legislation that would allow people to be released from prison prior to the expiration of their sentence as a COVID measure. And for those who could not be released, we launched a massive mutual aid drive. We redistributed over $60,000 that went to our inside members. It went to our formerly incarcerated members. And we also distributed funds to allied organizations who are often underrepresented, including Coyote, Rhode Island, who focuses on sex workers, and the Boston Release Network, folks who focus on people convicted of sex offenses. And so it was such a pleasure to try to give back during such a turbulent time for all of us, but especially so for those on the margins of society. And just in November, we relaunched as an independent organization. So kind of breaking off from the national mothership of Black in Pink to really establish ourselves as an independent organization ready to set out on our own. Shortly after, we were able to bring myself on staff finally as a paid person and compensated. And we just released a job application because we're looking to expand our team and take on a mutual aid coordinator, someone who can help distribute the mutual aid programs we do, and someone who can also assist people returning home from incarceration. And so those are just some of the exciting things that we've been working on. And finally, I just want to say that gathering today also feels like a spiritual moment as we situate ourselves in the socio-historical political context in which queer liberation has been fought. We can remember the Lavender Scare of the 50s when government purged LGBT people from the employment roles. We can remember all of the police violence that gave rise to the Stonewall Uprising, that gave birth to Pride. And we can also remember the tragic failures of the Bush administration and the Reagan administration during the height of the AIDS epidemic. And so all of this is to say that government hasn't always been a friend to the community. And that couldn't be any more true as we bring this conversation to today, as we look inside our prisons and see what is actually happening in them. When we look at policing and see in which ways they actually don't serve public safety and in fact undermine the very concept of public safety. And for those of us coming home from incarceration, we know how hard it is. And we know what the consequences are when we are under-resourced in those endeavors. We end up, again, undermining public safety. We end up in more reincarceration, recidivism. And so as we chart our path forward, we need to remember our history. And hopefully today we can recommit to that fight for liberation. And again, I said this was kind of spiritual because I often think of the history, our ancestors, both past and present, who have fought this fight before us. And much like a spiritual practice, it requires us to sit in the fires of our truth, of the truth around us, and to see clearly with wisdom what is actually happening, what serves us, what does not serve us, and to chart a path forward. So without further ado, we're going to hear from some amazing speakers, including some of our currently incarcerated members. And our panel will be moderated by Morgan Benson. And so I'm going to turn it over to him now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Mike, and to Senators here and Representative Lewis for that introduction today. I'm a member of Black in Pink. I'm currently calling from Florida, but I live in Massachusetts. I have the pleasure of introducing our fabulous panel today. We'll speak about the criminalization of LGBTQ people and people living with HIV in Massachusetts, first discussing policing, followed by conditions of confinement and experiences of reentry, highlighting some current legislation that we're working on and partnering on related to each of these areas. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping issues. Now or while they're speaking, please feel free to send questions for Lana, Lorelei, or Mike in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we look forward to hearing what you have for them. We'll also send a follow-up email to everyone who registered today, so you'll receive links to all the research and other work they mentioned, as well as fact sheets about the bills that we're discussing and contact information for the panelists. So without further ado, I will introduce each of them individually, beginning with Lorelei Lee. Lorelei, they, them, is a writer, porn performer, sex worker activist, trafficking survivor, organizer, Juris Doctor, Justice Catalyst Fellow, co-founder of the Disabled Sex Workers Coalition, founding member of Decrim Massachusetts, and a researcher with Hacking Hustling. Their book, Anything of Value, Looking at Sex Work Through Legal History, Memoir, and Cultural Criticism, is anticipated through Houghton Mifflin Harcourt in 2023. Over to you, Lorelei.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And thanks so much to Black and Pink for inviting me to speak here today. As Mike said, I too feel that this is really a practice of faith, and I am very moved to have this be how I am engaging with Pride Month at this time. So what I would like to talk about today is how the policing of sex work is the policing of LGBTQI+ people. So while both commercial sex and same-sex relationships have existed for thousands of years, it wasn't until the 19th century that two words were coined to describe not just these behaviors, but the people who engage in them. So the prostitute and the homosexual are both inventions of criminal law and were intended and continue to be intended to mark and exclude entire classes of people. So through these new designations in the 1800s, a public belief developed that the homosexual is always homosexual, is defined by his sexual attraction, and that the prostitute is always a prostitute regardless of whether she is working or not. And I use those pronouns intentionally, the male homosexual and the female prostitute, because during the 1800s, these were very gendered ideas. And as Massachusetts native and journalist Melissa Jera Grant has discussed, the prostitute and the homosexual delineated the margins outside of expected male and female sexual behavior. And if we know this history, we can start to understand how the policing of sex work was and still is identical in purpose to the policing of homosexuality. So today we have moved away from or repealed many of the laws by which LGBTQI+ people have previously been policed, but anti-sex work laws are now used to achieve the same effect. And that effect is, to paraphrase queer activists and attorneys Andrea Ritchie, Joey Mogul, and Kay Whitlock, to police non-normative sexualities in public spaces. So not only do LGBTQI+ people get profiled at alarming rates and targeted by police using anti-sex work laws, but also all people in the sex trades, whether we're LGBTQI+ or not, are also always understood as gender nonconforming and sexually deviant. Our engagement in the sex trades marks us as failed women, failed wives, fallen daughters, as hypersexualized, as permanently victimized or broken women, and as always contagious, both physically and morally. Male sex workers too are seen as hypersexualized and predatorial, particularly gay male sex workers, and are also seen as failed at masculinity or as cartoonishly hypermasculine, and again, as vectors of illness and as threats to public health. And I think those of you who are familiar with the history of the AIDS epidemic can understand the weight of that. Trans and Black and poor women face these gender stereotypes at an even greater intensity. And when we talk about gender-based violence, The violence that's almost never included in those conversations is the violence of public policing of gender nonconformity. And that is the violence of policing sex work. It's no coincidence that this policing takes the same form today that it did when LGBTQI plus women and men were policed at Stonewall in 1969, or at Compton's cafeteria in San Francisco in 1966, or at Dewey's lunch counter in Philadelphia in 1965, or at Cooper's Donuts in Los Angeles in 1959. Each of these places and dates marks an uprising by LGBTQI plus people against police who harassed and arrested them for wearing the wrong clothing, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. What many of the histories of these events leaves out is that an overwhelming number of the LGBTQI plus people who protested and rebelled in these uprisings were also sex workers. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, key players at Stonewall, who we commemorate every June, made their livings by selling sex and used the proceeds of their sex work to fund a home for trans youth, calling themselves the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR. As Mike testified in one of our bill hearings last week, the common night walking law in Massachusetts, just like numerous loitering for the purposes of prostitution laws across the country, many of which are currently being struck down, is a crime of time, place, and gender. That is to say that the people policed under the Massachusetts common night walking law are harassed and arrested simply for being in the public space at night and for wearing clothing the police profile as deviantly sexual, and for being in neighborhoods where prostitutes are known to be. In other words, they are being policed for wearing the wrong clothing in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. Sex work criminalization thus defines who is allowed to be in public space. And anti-sex work policing in the name of public safety actually makes public space more dangerous for LGBTQI plus people. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual young women are twice as likely as their straight counterparts to be incarcerated, and lesbian, gay, and bisexual young men are 10 times as likely to be incarcerated. Trans women are, with overwhelming frequency, profiled and arrested as sex workers simply for existing in public. This phenomenon happens so often that a term has been coined to describe it, and that is the criminalization of walking while trans. The phenomenon has been documented by the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch. So when we think about this, I hope that all of us can recognize that full sex work decriminalization is essential to the liberation of LGBTQI+ and gender nonconforming people. And that idea is supported by the National Center for Lesbian Rights, the LGBTQI+ Caucus of the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys, the National Center for Transgender Equality, the National LGBTQI+ Task Force, the Center for HIV Law and Policy, the Transgender Law Center, and Transcending Barriers, among a number of other national organizations. And similarly, in Massachusetts, this policy is supported by every LGBTQI+ and TGNC organization that has taken a position on the issue. So as Pride Month comes to a close, and as we continue to push for justice for all LGBTQI+ people, leaving no one behind, it is imperative that we remember that sex work is, has been, and always will be an LGBTQI+ issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lorelei. Thank you for that essential history, and we have so much to learn from you once sex work is decrimmed about how to ensure the health, safety, and power of sex workers in the industry into the future. So thank you for bringing us here today with that. Next, we're so excited this year to bring some of our inside members' voices to the virtual State House. So the first of 3 members who will speak about conditions of confinement and a bill they co-authored will be Su'Ganni. Pre-recorded remarks, especially those through a prison phone, can be choppy. So for the next 10 minutes or so, I really want the audience to listen into these remarks, lean in, and maybe turn your volume up. And there will also be captions at the bottom if easier. So to intro Su'Ganni, his work focuses on the ways in which the carceral state is both a failure and targets LGBTQ people, especially trans women. He often writes about the ways the Prison Rape Elimination Act causes harm to the incarcerated community and other manifestations of anti-queerness and anti-Blackness within the system. Most recently, he helped author the Rights Act. He was recently featured in Carceral Con, The Deceptive Terrain of Criminal Justice Reform by Kay Whitlock, and he's currently serving a life sentence at MCI Norfolk. So now we will hear some pre-recorded remarks from Su'Ganni.
Good afternoon. My name is Su'Ganni. I am currently incarcerated at MCI Norfolk, a Massachusetts state prison. I am a Black bisexual man. As well, I am the founder and current coordinator of United Brigade Bisexual Transgender Progress, UGP for short. UGP is a self-improvement and support group for LGBT plus prisoners. Last year, in 2020, I wrote a report entitled A Report of Dehumanization, Criminalization, and Hostility Towards LGBT plus Prisoners. My purpose of writing this report was to call attention to systemic homophobic and transphobic policies that gave prison officials and prison guards impunity to attack queer expression. In this bill, the Rights Act, Senate number 1566 and House number 2484, we have some courageous and praiseworthy lawmakers who seeks to break up these systemic homophobic and transphobic policies that I outlined in detail within my report. In this bill, you will read a portion that explains that no incarcerated person who engages in consensual sex with another prisoner will be placed in solitary confinement nor in any sort of restrictive housing. As well, you will read that public displays of affection, handshakes, hugs, touching of another's hair, and other forms of non-sexual contact amongst prisoners shall not be subject to disciplinary action. Upon reading this portion of the bill, one may conclude that our ambition is to permit prisoners to have sex and to allow incarcerated lovers to walk in the yards like it's a beach holding hands. Absolutely not. Our ambition is to decriminalize queer expressions, to take away policies that are used as a shield to harass, target, and mistreat LGBT plus prisoners. Being a bisexual man, an activist, and being fairly knowledgeable of queer history, I am well informed about the criminalization of gay and trans expression, the times when it was illegal for men or queens to wear women's clothing, the times when same-sex intimacy and gender identity was criminalized and subject to penalty, the times when just being queer was a crime, with the penalty being assault, jail, or death. When we reversed these laws, we took away the tools that were used to violate us and criminalize us. We, the brave queers in prison, are enduring some of the last policies that are criminalizing queer expression. So let us all tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a group to support the Rights Act, so that we can get rid of another group of homophobic and transphobic policies. Let us not wait until tomorrow. Let's get it done today. In conclusion, I want to thank my honorable family at Black and Pink, Massachusetts, Senator Julian and Representative Jack Patrick Lewis, and also tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a group to support Black and Pink, our Senator and our Representative Lewis. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm so glad that we were able to include his voice and 2 others that we'll hear. I think similarly, what struck me about Su'Ganni's speech was just how he focused on the historical roots of victimization of LGBTQ folks in prison and how that relates into what folks are still experiencing in prison. The report that Su'Ganni mentioned, we received a comment. We'll share that in the follow-up email that I mentioned. So next, we'll hear from Richard. He's a jailhouse lawyer and often helps his peers file lawsuits to protect their civil rights. He's been a tireless advocate with the Special Commission on Health and Safety of LGBTQI+ prisoners, exposing terrible conditions at MCI Shirley, and helped author the Rights Act. He's currently serving a life sentence at MCI Shirley. I also wanted to mention that you'll notice a couple of offensive terms have been edited in the subtitles. I just want to offer a content warning for that language and use this as a reminder for everyone about how isolated prisons are, as well as how particularly isolating they are inside for LGBTQ people. So with that in mind, I'm excited for you to hear now from Richard.
I'm grateful for this opportunity to tell you about the way LGBTQ inmates are treated by prison administrators, guards, and other inmates, because despite the Department of Corrections' claim of zero tolerance, we are verbally abused, harassed, and put in dangerous situations on a regular basis. While there are many areas that need to be addressed in order to protect LGBTQ inmates, the biggest fear we face on a daily basis is housing, because for most of us, this is where our problems begin. Though there are internal policies for assigning compatible inmates to double cells, this criteria is rarely, if ever, applied to LGBTQ inmates, and we are routinely given cellmates who nobody else will live with, or who are gang members, homophobic, or predators. And if we complain, we're given the choice of refusing housing and being placed in solitary confinement, or fighting the cellmate and being placed in solitary confinement. In short, a no-win situation. Even when inmates come right out and tell guards they won't live with a, quote, fag, the standard reply is, do what you gotta do. Worst of all, this is such a common practice that it has morphed into an actual culture within the prison system. I'm currently housed at MCI Shirley, a medium security facility with a population of over 1,000 inmates, most of whom are young gang members. Of these 1,000 plus inmates, 4 of us are openly gay. Since by gang rules, members aren't allowed to live with someone who is gay, the chance of safe housing for any LGBTQ inmate at this facility is extremely low. In the 2.5 years I've been at Shirley, I've been threatened by cellmates not to even look at them, assigned gang members and predators as cellmates, and even told that the administration viewed it as suspicious when I asked to be housed with an LGBTQ inmate I've known for many years, though they find nothing suspicious about gang members living together. During my first year at this prison, a gay man committed suicide because he couldn't take the harassment and abuse anymore. A crippled bisexual inmate was severely gay bashed while 3 guards looked on. And an openly gay inmate was sexually assaulted, even though the administration had been warned of the threat his attacker posed to him. A more recent incident that illustrates how poorly LGBTQ inmates are treated occurred when 2 gang members forced a handicapped, non-binary inmate to refuse housing. After witnessing the events unfold, my friend and I were on the phone with Michael Cox, the executive director of Black and Pink and a member of the LGBTQ Commission. We began to relate the story of what had just taken place, but less than a minute into our conversation, one of the same gang members walked over to us and said, "This is a gang phone. Fags can't use it." And we were forced to hang up or get beaten up. As punishment for their hate crimes, the 2 gang members were transferred to the best medium security facility in the state, while we were left to deal with being labeled as rats in a gang-dominated prison. And yet, the DOC finds nothing wrong with this. Worse still, the DOC refuses to let any of us transfer to a more docile facility, because to do so would be to admit that zero tolerance is nothing but an illusion. It's for these reasons that the Rights Act is so crucial to the rehabilitation, health, and safety of LGBTQ inmates. I therefore urge every legislator to please vote to pass the Rights Act in order to finally give us the protection that every human being deserves. Thank you.
And thank you to Richard for sending in those comments and powerful words. I think what struck me most was his insight about how many LGBTQ prisoners' problems start with housing and how important that is, how that highlights the importance of people who are most impacted by policy having their voice reflected in the process, because they know best what the problems are and what they need. And so I'm really glad that we got to hear from Richard on that aspect of the bill. And finally, on healthcare protections, we're going to hear from Randy, who is a long-term AIDS survivor and tireless advocate with the Special Commission on Health and Safety of LGBTQI+ prisoners, exposing the terrible conditions at MCI Shirley, and he also helped author the Rights Act. Randy also has artistic talents, and he often sends handmade cards to free-rolled members of Black and Pink, and he's scheduled to be released in 2023. So now we'll hear from Randy.
Thank you for giving me the chance to explain what I've gone through in the DOC because of being openly gay. I've had AIDS for 35 years, and over this time, I've become resistant to medication after medication until I'm now left with a limited number of options to fight the virus. Despite all my pleas for medication to be given properly, the DOC and its medical providers have fought me tooth and nail. Nowhere has this been more pronounced than at MCI Shirley, where DOC policies prevent me from receiving medication properly, which has caused my viral load to become detectable several times over the last couple of years. In the last 2 years I've been here, I've run out of my HIV medication numerous times because the nursing staff simply failed to reorder it. My medication's been crushed to powder, despite large warnings on the label that we do not crush. And even though the manufacturer states doses must be taken at the same time each day, or the virus may become untreatable, I've been given my medication anytime from 7 p.m. to 1:30 a.m., and they refuse to solve this problem. The reason for all these issues is that HIV medications have been removed from what is called the KOP, Keep on Persons medication list, simply just to save money. When I asked the HIV doctor about this, he told me, I want to save lives, while the DOC just wants to save money. On top of this, the DOC and WellPath intentionally neglect my AIDS-related medical issues due to cost. I've been assigned a nurse practitioner who admits she doesn't understand basic HIV issues, and yet the administration refuses to give me someone who is qualified to deal with my health issues. Since the HIV doctor only deals with viral loads, for all my other issues, I'm left with a person that's not qualified to provide adequate health care for someone with AIDS. In addition, although I suffer from long-term effects from AIDS, the DOC refuses to grant me even the smallest accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And at any moment, I can be moved to a cell with a homophobic inmate who won't live with the fag with AIDS. Well, I could go on and on about the abuses we all suffer in the name of security. I really just want to express the urgent need to pass this Rights Act, because this is the only way LGBTQ inmates will ever receive the health care and safety that we're entitled to and deserve. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me. And thanks for the pleas. And please vote for the Rights Act. Thank you.
And thanks to Randy for sharing his comments. I think just want to take a moment to reflect on the stakes for him and many of our other members around these issues, and the urgency in his voice. So finally, last but not least, we have one more panelist who will talk about experiences of reentry. I'm very excited to introduce Lana, she, her, who's a formerly incarcerated Black trans woman and member of Black and Pink MA, serving on our advisory council. She was one of the founding members of Boston Glass and a member of the advisory board for Transgender Day of Remembrance in 2019. She was one of the first openly trans women to attend high school in Massachusetts. And as a devout Christian, her faith fuels her work in the community. Over to you, Lana.
Thank you for all those who came out today. I just want to touch first base on the struggle, of what transgenders go through. But before I discuss the struggle, I want to just name Chanel Pickett. She was murdered November 20th, 1995. Rita Hester, she was murdered November 28th, 1998. Lisa Daniels, she was murdered September 17th, 2005. And now recently, a community activist who I also grew up with, Jahira D'Alto, she was murdered May 4th, 2021. So I just want to speak their names today. Rufus, Monique, she was murdered in 1997 in Fields Corner. These are Black women who have been murdered in our state, whose murders have gone unsolved, minus Chanel. And now we know who Jahira's murderer is. But this has been a problem since the beginning. Just alone in this year, 27 transgendered women have been murdered. And last year it was 44. And around the time that Jahira was murdered, it was 19. So something has to be done. We have to be able to have the rights that any other woman of any color has, and to finding out and getting things solved as far as like our murders and the crime that is happening in the transgender community. We need support. We need advocates. We need allies. You know, we need more people who are concerned with the murder and the things that are going on in the transgender community. I wanted to talk about, sorry, let me do this, speaking from my phone. I wanted to also highlight some of the programs that are working towards building the transgender community. I wanted to shout out the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. They do so much in the transgender community to make sure that trans women have proper primary care, behavioral health, HIV counseling, case management. You know, a lot of transgender women, they do not have the proper facilities that they can go to and get care and feel comfortable. And so at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, they are treated with dignity and pride, no matter what walk of life that they have came from, no matter if they're on drugs, no matter if they're have a criminal background, they are treated as human at the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. So I just wanted to highlight all the work that they're doing, Pam Klein and many others. I want to also highlight the transgender resistance that they started last year. This movement has done so much so far in the transgender community. They are now, with Athena Vaughn and Chastity Bowick, they're now holding people accountable for the atrocities that transgenders face. You know, as Lorelei said earlier, walking while trans. You know, this is real. I am a victim of walking while trans. I wanted to touch bases on a lot of the things that Black and Pink are doing for transgenders. There is, as far as I know, in Massachusetts, there is no program that is working with housing transgendered women when they leave the facility. Black and Pink has done so much. Just last year, they spent over $10,000. And in this year alone, they're estimated to spend over $21,000 just to make sure that transgendered women are being housed correctly with the right pronouns and getting this same care and access as our other brothers and sisters in the struggle. And so in Black and Pink, we are urging the community, the senators, the governors to support us. We are trying to me being one of the members of the advisory board, we are looking for support to help find a house for transgendered women that are released out of programs, whether it's a drug program, whether it's prison, because we know, and as I faced, when I was getting out, there was nowhere I can turn to but Black and Pink. And so that's sad because we have programs for those who are on, Narcotics Anonymous, opiate houses for those who are on opiates, recovering from opiates, Suboxone. The men have sober houses where they can go to. And when they're in prison, when they leave out, they're set up. But when a transgender woman leaves out of prison, she has nowhere to go. She's already ostracized by the community. She may not even have family that support her. So then what does she do when she's released? She goes to her survival. The survival skills kick in because that's taught early as transgenders, not being able to get jobs, having to drop out of school without family support or funding, like programs that help them get better education, to find jobs that will hire them, where they can be themselves and use the right pronouns. So what they do, they turn to the streets and then they start, they find means of work, whether it be prostitution, whether it be stealing, whatever they do to survive. It's survival of the fittest in this jungle out here. And so without these programs and the proper, allies to help to reintegrate these transgender women back into society where they can have a healthy platform to live the healthy life that the all-American promise is promised to them, where they can leave out and have a home where they can go to. Because as we know, and as Mike Cox from Black and Pink has struggled with finding housing, we're discriminated against at the female sober homes. They don't want transgender women there. At the male sober homes, they don't want transgenders there. And then we face, well, if they do let them go, will they be harassed? What are they going to go through? These are the things that they are faced with. And this has to stop. We need funding. We need housing. We need a transgender sober house, a transgender safe home where they can feel safe, because there are transgendered women that may not feel safe being housed with women or men. Why should they have to alternate? Why should they have to shapeshift or diminish who they are just to have a place to rest their head? These are the things that we're faced with. These are the things that we deal with every day. It's a struggle. And let's not talk about discrimination in the work field. United States, we're just making changes now in Massachusetts where we can actually put female on the ID. But there was a time when the ID didn't match the person. And that right there can affect the mind. So let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about getting more programs for the mental health of transgendered women to help them, navigate in society, to let them know that they are welcome and they are supported. We don't have that. But I'm grateful to Black and Pink and all of its members and all the things that they have done just alone in last year for transgendered women. But it doesn't stop there. It's not enough. The donations that we get, we're just making it by, but we make it work. Mike makes it work. Eli makes it work. Rachel, Katie, all of the members, they make it work, and they do not want to leave no stone unturned. And they find a way. We create safe houses where members can sleep on a couch. We try to find different outlets where they have to go. But why do we have to do that? Why can't the government or city officials help fund a house where they can be and get the help and proper care that they can get, proper mental care, people that can help them fill out job applications. you know, all those things that they may need help in to be a better productive person in society. So that's where we're at today. We're trying to start a revolution. It's here. It starts now and today, and it starts with us, people that are in the office, people that are in the Senate, people that are at City Hall. What are we doing for the transgender community to better the community? You know, why do transgenders have to feel like that they are at the bottom of the totem pole in the LGBTQ radius? Why do they have to feel like they're at the bottom? So we want to elevate them. We want to put them to the top and accept them just as we accept everybody else as our brothers and sisters. We want to create programs where they can, you know, get the support that they need. Thank you. If there's any closing remarks or questions, you're welcome to ask as this program later goes on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Lana. Thank you for all of your work in the community. Thank you for all of that insight you shared. And thank you for all of the comments about Black in Pink, which I would totally echo. So now we have a little bit of time left for Q&A. So I'll ask that Mike, Lana, and Lorelei join me back up on the screen. I have some questions prepared, but please feel free to add some questions to the Q&A, anything about sex work, decrim, and the industry, anything about the Rights Act and conditions of confinement that might be able to speak to, and then anything that Lana mentioned, just those needs among the community here in Massachusetts, trans community, related to housing, mental health care, so many different things that we need to make happen. So I will wait for Mike and Lana to join us.
Yes, I'm here.
Thanks. Great. Okay, so maybe we'll turn it back over to you, Mike. This is something that I would be interested in hearing you speak to, and it's important to me. I wonder if you can talk about how Black in Pink's values informed its legislative agenda and the bills that you're working on now.
That's a great question. So historically, Black in Pink is plugged into work already happening in the community. And after going through several legislative sessions with amazing comrades in the community who taught us so much here at Black in Pink, this year we felt prepared to write our own legislation. And so we surveyed the work happening across the nation. We surveyed our inside members to see what it was that they would want, not me, right, or some policy wonk thinking they know it's best for somebody else. But we just went straight to the source and asked people, if we could do something for you, what would it be? And I was amazed at what they didn't say. They didn't say, get me out of here. They didn't say, I want to be released right now, file legislation for that. What they did say was, I don't know if I'm going to be alive tomorrow because of the way I'm treated in these facilities. I don't know if my HIV is going to mutate again because my medication's all messed up in here. And so what we did do was we took those calls to action. Many of our inside members wrote parts of the Rights Act. And we worked with our sponsors, Julian and Jack Lewis, to really make it happen. We got it filed, and I'm so excited that we get to fight for something that our members want, our members wrote, and our members really need to stay alive. There's nothing superfluous in the bill. The bill is all about life-saving measures to make sure our people can make it out alive. And for those serving life sentences, that they can finish out their time on this earth with some dignity and respect.
Thank you so much for that. We received a question in the chat for you, Lana, from Jennifer Williams. She asks, how do you feel when it comes to LGBTQ plus people? It's often pictured as a white gay male instead of showcasing Black or BIPOC trans women.
How do I feel about that? I mean, representation is everything. And, people of color have been misrepresented for so long, as well as the LGBTQ community. And I feel like they probably feel like a white male is more marketable or safer. I have a problem with that because it doesn't represent all of us. People in the LGBT community, they come in many shapes, many colors, many diversities. I would love to see the day that LGBTQ community advertisement has a woman in a hijab, or something like that. So how do I feel about it? We have to hit up those people, those sponsors, or whoever is creating these ads, and we have to email them and let them know that that ad is not all inclusive. I recently did that with a clothing line. I said to them, there's nobody on there that looks like me. And so I said, and I purchase clothes here all the time. And they reached me, the corporate office reached back to me. He was like, thank you so much. He said, we are really working to diversify that. It's really important to us. We have been scouting out some new models and stuff. He said, so I should expect some people of color in the fall campaign. I said, I'll be watching. So we just have to hold them accountable, and we have to find out who is doing these advertisements, who is looking for these models, because we know half of the people who they show are just paid models. We want real people that we look like, that we can know that, okay, I know this person, this looks like me, somebody that is relatable. So how I feel about it, I'm hoping that with this going on now and people watching, that, people can listen to our voice and see that we need more diversity and inclusivity, if that's a word, inclusiveness. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. So just a reminder, feel free to drop questions, but I've talked a little bit about this with Lorelei, and I'd love if you could speak now to just what some of the biggest barriers to sex work decrim are. It's something that a lot of people are working on. What do you think are some of the challenges?
Yeah, there are so many challenges. So I have been doing this sort of organizing and activist work, and just honestly, I mean, living in the world as a sex worker is an act of resilience and an act of protest pretty much all the time. So that for me has been 20 years. And I can definitely speak to so many barriers, but something else that I think I should mention is that in the last couple of years, we have seen a nationwide shift in how people understand sex workers and sex work. This has been particularly noticeable in the media when articles are written about sex work issues and about policies that are being considered that impact sex workers. More and more often, we do see media folks actually interviewing actual sex workers about what the impact that those policies will have. I would say that one of the biggest barriers that we still face is education. I think there are a lot of people who do want to support people in the sex trades, but there has been a narrative developed over the last, honestly, over the last 100 years, 125 years. So I actually say that 125 years, more like 150, because 1874 is when the Page Act passes at the federal level. And that's the first act limiting immigration into the United States. And it is an anti-sex work law that discriminated against Chinese women and profiled them as working in the sex trades. So even in the turn of the 19th century, we had this sort of divide between understanding sex workers as victims in need of rescue or understanding sex workers as deviant and contagious and public health risk and morally culpable as well. And that has not really changed. Now, I think we have, since the 70s, we've added maybe one more narrative, which is the narrative of the consensual sex worker. And honestly, I know that there are probably a lot of people here who will be startled to hear me say this, but I think that when we talk about consent as the prerequisite for talking about sex work decriminalization, that serves to obfuscate the actual issues, because we never talk about consent to other forms of work when we talk about enhancing labor rights on those jobs. We don't ask, do those workers really want to be there, before we say they should have minimum wage protections and maximum hour protections and protections against violence in the workplace. Sex workers end up doing this work for so many reasons, the same reasons that folks end up in all kinds of other jobs, and particularly in low paid and low barrier jobs. And that means we just don't have a lot of control. We don't necessarily have a lot of choices about what kind of work we're going to do. However, that shouldn't lead to us being criminalized or to our work being criminalized. And so I'm sorry, I am talking perhaps a little long, but I'd just like to mention one other barrier, which is this idea of us as victims in a sort of uniform way. It is absolutely true that sex workers face all kinds of barriers, systemic as well as individual. However, the idea that our clients are victimizing us and thus should be the ones being policed, that simply leads to a situation where if we are facing asymmetrical criminalization, where sex workers are supposedly decriminalized, but our clients are still criminalized, that still means that our work is being policed. And so everything that I talked about in terms of the way that police profile people who they view as sex workers, including trans women and including women of color, means that they will still be surveilling those of us who are doing this work. And every time we have an interaction with the police, that interaction is potentially dangerous. And when police are surveilling clients, that doesn't mean that they're not going to arrest sex workers for loitering, for low-level drug crimes, or any drug crimes, for anything that they can pin on sex workers, because sex workers are overwhelmingly profiled by police and targeted. So I'll stop talking there. I could probably talk forever about this, and I'm going on too long. But thank you for the question.
I wish we had time to. I'm constantly learning more about this issue, so thank you for all of that important information and how we understand and approach this. So thank you to another Morgan out there for your question. We have time for maybe a couple more. So Morgan says, research suggests that incarceration is particularly traumatizing within the first 30 days of arrest, and that more rehabilitative measures have success. So why do you think we still lean towards these harsh models of punishment, such as solitary confinement, which can only increase these feelings of isolation and loss of self? Mike, I don't know if you can speak to that. I'd like to.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think just zooming out for a minute, this past year has really asked more of us with the George Floyd uprising and even pandemic and the way it swept through these prisons and jails like wildfire. We're being called on more and more to have more imagination about how we can kind of create the kind of community that we could all be proud to live in. One that values all of our lives, one that sees none of us as disposable, as we saw in some of the artwork displayed earlier from some of our pen pals. And so I think that unfortunately, there's a lack of imagination right now. And so the reliance is so heavy on the criminal legal system due to that lack of imagination. It's really just the status quo of if someone's having a mental health breakdown in the street, that we lock them up. We call the police, we handcuff them, and we cart them away. The police aren't equipped to deal with and to care for our community members in that way. While incarcerated, prisons are run by the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. This is law enforcement. They're not equipped to see people as people. They're equipped to see people as security threats. And that is a very different understanding and way of looking at our neighbors, our brothers, our sisters, our children, our lovers who end up incarcerated. And so when you see someone only as a potential security risk, there's no hope. And we can see that play out over and over in the news cycles. However, I am encouraged that the work of so many formerly incarcerated people like Leslie Creedle, Andrea James of FJA, and so many others, Ramilda at Massachusetts Against Solitary Confinement, are really putting in the work to create the community we want to live in, right? So there's mutual aid and the community building. And then there's also the dismantling of challenging these oppressive systems of policing and prisons to say no more. Like, we're sick of no imagination. And it's really, I was so inspired by Sonia Chang Diaz's launch for governor. And what she said was, you know, legislators have power and we need to be empowered and like feel good about using it for our neighbors and our loved ones. And that's why I'm so proud to partner with folks like Julian Sear and Rep. Lewis, who also feel like they want to share power. They want to share power with the community in ways that will lead us onward to live in the kind of world we all want to live in.
Thank you so much. I hope folks are also inspired by, just the approach of Black and Pink and the way that y'all think about these issues in such a wide lens. So maybe I'll ask one more question of Lana, if you are able to hop back on or hear me. You talked a lot about what you should have, the services you wish existed now. Could you say a little bit more about what kind of support and what kind of community you wish you had come home to when you were released?
Well, I just know from my experience and from many girlfriends' experience in Boston, like I've helped out so many and talked to so many. It would be nice if we had the option. You know, I remember like just sitting in jail, and then like all these guys is like, well, I know where I'm going to this house is going to take me, and then I'm going to this place and this place. They all had a setup, like they all knew where they was going. And I'm like, oh, who do I, oh my God, oh, okay, well, I can call Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. Oh, maybe I can call, yep, I can call Black and Pink, but we need more options. We need to be able to be confident in knowing where we're going, that there is a bridge that we can cross, that there is a hand that's waiting to take us to where we need to go to help support us. You know, so I would like to see in this upcoming future, this year, not next year, I would like to see in this upcoming future, a building where trans women can go to get recovery, to get stability, to get on her feet. I would like to hear a transgender say, you know what, I'm going to, you know, whatever the name is, I'm going to the Black and Pink butterfly house, the house of glitter. And this is where I'm gonna go to get my care and get on my feet. you know, because they're going to help me. And then I'm going to get a job from there. And then I want to go back to school, you know, because these are the aspirations and hopes that transgendered women want. Even the men who are in sex work, the women that are in sex work, they have dreams and aspirations and hopes too. They don't just wake up and say, oh, I want to be discriminated against. I want to be stopped by walking while trans and my Corey messed up and then I can't, you know, make it in life. So they want that to be able to say that, you know, I can just go, when I get out, I know that the House of Glitter is going to be waiting for me to embrace me. And I have a bed waiting for me, and I don't have to compromise myself. I don't have to sell myself, or I don't have to maybe braid my hair down or pull my hair back and wear a t-shirt and not be expressive. I can be myself and walk into my flourish. So that's what I hope to see. More opportunities set up where transgendered women don't have to go through molehills and leap over tall walls, where they can just open that door and walk through. Yes.
Thank you so much, Lana. I hope for that so much too, and I am so glad you're working on it, and Black and Pink, and all the other amazing works that have been mentioned. That is a beautiful vision. So we're just about out of time, and I will pass it back over to Mike to close us out.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today, and special thank you to all of the panelists